Stacy. I'm going to pass things over to you to give us a quick intro and then pass it over to the other folks before we dive in.
Okay, thank you, Savannah. Nice to see everyone here today. I am Stacy Cretu. I'm the interim CMO with Rocket Reach, and I'm here to moderate our discussion today around hiring and recruiting the sales team. So I would like to just have everyone, our panelists, because really no one, cares about me moderating it, but our experts here, I would like to have them just give a quick introduction of themselves and what their roles are at the companies that they're with, and then we'll begin. So I'm going to turn it to Mike if you want to start us off.
Great. So thanks. So Mike Rosenberg, I'm the head of sales at Rocket Reach. So I've been in sales for about 20 years. I've been in management for 17 of them. And I started off my career as a headhunter. So I worked at Robert Half for about 7 years before going into HR tech. So a lot of experience of seeing the other side of things, as well as selling into the recruitment and HR space for quite a while. And in addition, doing that here as well.
And just to keep it flowing with Rocket Reach, Julia?
Yeah, hello everyone. Very happy to be chatting about growing sales. I head up recruiting and HR here at Rocket Reach, and early on in my career, I was on the agency side, working mostly with sales teams, hiring for early stage startups, and slowly moved in-house. And I'm partnering with Mike to essentially build our sales org from scratch over the last year and a half. So excited to chat with everyone.
And last, but certainly not least, Brian.
Yeah, hey everybody. Big thanks to Sales Hacker and the Rocket Reach team for letting me jump on here. Brian Smith Jr. I work for a company called Vendition. We're helping B2B SaaS companies solve the skill and experience gap for incoming SDRs through a 12-week apprenticeship program. I've had a couple different jobs at Vendition. Currently, right now, I lead our channel sales department, and it's been a really cool ride to build that out here the last couple of months. Spent the last 7-8 years in SaaS, but specifically around professional services, more often than not. So I've worked for a previous recruiting firm, RPO, if you're familiar with that term, recruitment process outsourcing firm. And I've pretty much sold to sales professionals the last 7 or 8 years. It's probably how I build my network, and the brand I have now is just constantly selling to salespeople, which in my opinion is probably one of the toughest things to do. So excited to talk about this topic. I think that everybody is looking to learn from.
Great, thank you guys. So we're just going to jump right in, and hopefully, I just want to kind of reiterate with what Savannah said. Open communication, open dialogue for this event today. So any questions you have, please feel free to drop it in the chat. But jumping in, obviously today and what's going on with the world today, I think in every company, every industry, every organization, recruiting has been a challenge. And by all means, not a simple task whatsoever. And then you turn it over to recruiting a sales team, which can be even more challenging in some ways if we're focusing on what we would consider potentially a traditional approaches to recruiting, for finding those needles in the haystack when it comes to the really good sales professionals that are out there that really have mastered the art of selling and understanding their strengths and positioning themselves within the best light from a sales professional. So for Brian and Mike, as sales professionals, what do you feel, based on what I had just stated, what do you feel that is makes that statement true or not true? And how do you feel about that?
Ryan, you want to go, or you want age before beauty?
Hey, we got age and beauty here, but I'll let you go first for sure.
All right. I think I have a few more years, but look, I think it's always difficult. I've spoken with some of our customers who are on the recruiting side, and a lot of colleagues on the technology side within the recruitment, and it does feel like things may slow down due to macroeconomic conditions, but it doesn't make it any easier to find the good people. And recruiting like a sales team, a cohesive sales team, is always difficult. And it always depends upon what stage you are. So like at Rocket Reach, I inherited one person, and now we're at about 30. And huge thanks to Julia for helping us get there. But it's not easy to do it because, I've always been told the two toughest roles to recruit for are actually recruiters and salespeople, because we should be able to give really good interviews. So how do you get past it? And we look at culture as a big piece of it, and everyone throws that term around. But what does culture really mean? And it's figuring out who is going to be cohesive with each other, not from the start, but 2 years later, 3 years later, who's going to be able to grow into certain roles. And the best way that I do it, as well as advice for anyone for going on interviews, is to ask questions not so directly of like, how is your culture, but having them ask questions to whomever you may be working with or for, as far as how they approach some of the cohesiveness. How do they approach investing in individuals from that perspective to build culture? Because for me, background is kind of important. What have you done before? But for me, I'm definitely more looking at some of the softer skills. And how do you ascertain the softer skills is through stories. So that's what I do. I just ask people to tell me a ton of stories and tell me experiences as far as what they've done. And you can honestly be able to get a good sense of that. I kind of call it the one beer strategy. Like, would I want to have one beer with this person or more, or just a shot? And so have someone tell you stories about what it is that they've done, and then you'll pretty much figure out, can I sit next to this person? Can I work with this person for the next 2 years, 3 years? And if you can get that collectively, as well as their ability to do the job, that's what I found is the best way. Because when I started, everyone was a generalist. Everyone just did whatever. And now that we're growing and maturing, we're finding specific roles for people. And we need to make sure that we hire people that can fit into that mold as well. Brian, what do you think? Now I'll pass to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully for the sake of a good webinar, you and I don't agree on everything and we can get some banter back and forth. But, recruiting in general, it's not a simple task, right? And I think mainly it has to do with a lot with psychology, right? Us as humans interacting with each other. You hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people, myself included, we lean to interviewing for likability versus effectiveness, because effectiveness is hard to measure in a 30-minute window, maybe even an hour window, right? So I think it's difficult for that, just that segment alone, right? We typically try to interview for likability, and Mike, like you said, right, sit next to a person is part of it, but at the end of what you said, right, can you actually get the job done? So I think it's fair to say that recruiting in general is not a simple task; it's very complex. That's why we're here talking about it today.
And well, of course, we have to hear from Julia because she is our, that at Rocket Reach, the hiring and recruiting first line of defense. So based on the lovely banter and with Brian and Mike, and actually before we roll into Julia, I have to say, and speaking about interviewing and the one beer strategy is what we're going to now coin it, Mike. I'm sorry, but that's what we're doing. One of the craziest, in my opinion, of course, I wasn't being hired for a sales position, but one of the craziest questions I have ever gotten asked from an interview perspective was, what is your spirit animal? So I think that tells you that you ask what your spirit animal, and then you have to give feedback on to why that is your spirit animal, which I think is a little bit of a funny, my funny response to what it was. But that being said, Julie, I'm sure you don't ask those silly questions. And in your role, with recruiting, taking an active role in helping Mike recruit from a sales perspective, what have you found challenging when it comes to like sales roles versus engineering roles or tech roles? And how have you, in your profession, along with Mike or your colleagues, overcome this?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Salespeople can sometimes be difficult to interview because they can usually sell themselves very well. A good salesperson in many ways can be a great bullshit artist, and for a lack of better terms, it doesn't mean that a salesperson is good just because they can sell themselves and their story. And it can really be hard to get past the sales pitch and really get a read for character and truth behind how successful someone's been in their past roles. I usually try and break down barriers quickly and ask questions that cut through jargon and kind of prove some of their either sales skills or just their character. And I like candidates talk first and most of the time. I find that often when you pass the torch over and let someone drive the conversation right at the start of an interview, you'll see if they feel confident and if they see it as an opportunity and how quickly they set an agenda and clearly communicate when they're given the mic. And you can really pick up, how low you go and sorry to steal the other thing we live by here, Mike, if you're going to say it, but we have a really hard no asshole policy at Rocket Reach, and you can quickly kind of see where someone's ego sits when you kind of hand it over and let them start talking first. So it's usually something I do right when jumping into an interview.
And Brian, what do you think about the no asshole policy and having someone speak first and letting you kind of stand back and listen?
We had a couple thoughts on it. I think there's a time and place for everything. I'll say that much. I agree with it from the aspect of, right, like everybody wants to work with good people. What I've learned is tenacity is not a bad thing. And at times tenacity can make you look like an asshole. Right. So it all depends, right? Every situation is different. There's no silver bullet. I think if I'm leading an organization or a department for sure, I think I definitely would think with that mind first. If I'm in the trenches in the middle of the day, in the grind, so to speak, I don't know. I may like for somebody to be an asshole every once in a while. And maybe asshole's not the terminology I'm thinking of, but somebody that's willing to speak up. Um, Above all else for the sake of movement or moving forward. So, I don't think I disagree with them, but maybe I have a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think of the asshole policy as the someone who's willing to step on the shoulders of others to get to where it is that they want to go to, as opposed to like the rest of the team. And I get it. We're in sales. We are money driven. So anything you throw at us that's money driven is what we're going to go towards. But it doesn't mean it has to be the only thing you go towards. And I worked in an organization where it can be that political. And it's like, whose shoulders are you going to step on to get to wherever you get next? And teamwork doesn't matter. Let's go be lone wolves, because as long as I bring in the money, what do they care? And I think it's just a very negative old school mentality that we try not to have. And especially depends upon your environment. Like if you're in a startup, it's so cancerous, because if I bring in the first few people and one of them is that, nobody else is going to learn from them, even if they are the best salesperson. So I know what you mean by like a little bit of asshole, like edge. I think it's more like if they take that approach towards their sales, yeah, you can get a killer. It's more of like if it's, the guns in on that's where I just see it cancerous. So I think it's like the definition of what is a asshole.
So you don't want a doormat, is what I'm hearing. You want somebody that is able to speak up for themselves, be able to handle rejection, handle feedback, and is also very polite about their responses, is what I hear. So we did have a question before we move on to not one of my questions, but we did have a question from the audience, and one of the questions was, how or what do you ask to get insight on to determine a strong work ethic? So I'm going to ask Julia this one from an HR professional perspective, and then if from a sales perspective, Brian or Mike, if you want to jump in, please feel free.
Yeah. So I think when hearing it, so typically there's a number of ways to assess this specific thing. One question that gets at it for sure is really hearing someone's thought process or step-by-step process that they follow when either they're starting a search or starting prospecting, and having them truly walk through what they do to research that specific kind of prospecting, having them talk you through how they prepare for a call and what their strategy is once they get on the phone. It kind of shows essentially what they consider most important and the process that they go through to make sure that they're basically taking the right steps to have the right information prior to getting on the phone, or thinking about the product and the opportunity for that potential customer the right way, and then really what their approach is. How do they loop in other people, other team members? How do they lean on other people? But it kind of shows not only kind of how quickly they move, but the process and steps they take to do that. It's one way if you want real kind of tangible examples of how they approach something now. Yeah, I don't know if there's something else, Mike or Brian, that you would ask to get at this. There's a lot of ways to ask this.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
So, Julia, I agree with you said, right? There's a lot of ways you can ask it. This is my opinion. It's why I joined Vendition. I don't think it's possible to figure it out necessarily, like truly figure it out in an interview, right?
I agree with that. I agree with that too. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm a big fan of like apprenticeships. Right? That's why I joined Vendition. Like you've got to see somebody in the job before you give them that thumbs up. So there's some things you can get to that eliminate the risk of them completely not having it, but actually figuring it out. It's nothing better than like, right, there's why that saying throw somebody in the deep end. Like you'll figure out pretty quickly, right? If they have that characteristic or that trait. So yeah, there's a ton of things you can ask, but to actually figure it out, like there you need to have a way to see them in the job, in the position, doing the function, whatever that looks like. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah. No, you're good. I look, I steer into the crash. Like it's the question behind the question. And Andy kind of put it of like, what is the hardest thing you've done? Just to kind of see like the step building that maybe someone's done. I keep going further. It's like, tell me the last thing you failed at doing. And it's usually like, that's the question behind the question, which can solve a lot of things. Like, do you have hubris? Do you have transparency? Are you going to be honest with me? Do you have something off the top of your head? I ask so many questions during the interview that you can't really prep for. It's like, tell me a story of the last time you blank. And that solves for me. It checks a ton of boxes. But for me, tell me the last time you failed, besides them being able to hopefully be honest, because the last thing they're going to think, they're going to try to, first of all, think of something, well, what's a negative that's a positive? But hopefully they give me something honest. But if they talk about what it is that they failed and the simplicity or the complexity of whatever that might be, like, the last time I failed, I tried prospecting into this company and I didn't. But here are the 17 things I did to try to get into there first before I failed. Just shows kind of the work ethic, the stick-to-itiveness, the perseverance that they had within it. So for me, if I want to know what the wrong answer is, I lean into the question of what's going to give me the wrong answer, which hopefully will then lead me to the right one.
I would say too, you could probably, Mike, you just made me think about this. You can find out pretty quickly if they rehearsed it and if it's a script, because if you focus more on, if you tell me more about like, hey, here's how I'm going to get better at that, here's how I'm going to fix that, like I know that's the tendency to do in an interview. I want to hear, again, if you ask me like what was the failure, give me the detail around that failure more than how you're going to come about it or change it next time, right? Like in that moment I want to hear more about that failure, because like Mike was saying, that'll show you their ability and that characteristic you're looking for. That's a good point. I'm going to write that down. Thanks, Mike.
It's recorded, so you don't have to write it down. You can rewatch all this. Great. So, I mean, we're kind of like just rolling right along with we have a lot of questions that the audience is asking, so it's really good. And they ironically are going right along with my kind of next questions about everything. But we're talking about traits and trying to figure out, as a hiring team, how do we hire for a sales team, and what are some of the best traits in hiring for these roles in a SaaS startup? So we've already talked about some of the traits, but Mike, Brian, is there any, and Julia, is there any other traits that you have that you can think off the top of your head that are like number one traits of a salesperson? And why you would hire for those traits. And then I'm going to go into a question that one of the audience members has a little later in regards to hiring and best practices. and around what emotional intelligence, which I think also aligns in with traits as well. So if we kind of want to, just kind of go round robin and talk about just, number one off the top of your head, what's the number one trait you're looking for when you're hiring a salesperson, whether it's mid-level, executive level, or, just starting out?
I'm happy to. Oh, you want to go, Mike?
No. Oh no.
No one has to fight over this. Everybody can answer.
There's honestly a few that it's hard to choose one. I think one that maybe I have this lens because I'm thinking of it from a development perspective, just being connected to the people side of the business. But it's coachability. So much of sales is constant evolution and development, and it's learning from fellow colleagues, and there's plenty of trial and error. And if someone has a difficult time being coached, just receiving constructive feedback, it's a full stop for me. And when someone can take feedback with grace and humility, and has that low ego attitude that really allows for adaptability, which is incredibly important for any environment, but especially in a startup, those traits really allow for massive personal growth and success, and overall, team success as well.
I'm gonna go for the easier one and say I don't know of one, because if I do, I don't know. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things on my LinkedIn. You forgot this one, so and everything I throw around is going to be a buzzword, and so I'll explain a little bit, because there's nothing I hate worse than just buzzwords for buzzword's sake. But I look for adaptability, again, especially within startup environments, or I would say in sales teams that have fewer than 10 people. You're going to need people to be jack of all. You're going to need people who are going to be able to do more than what the typical role is. So like when I started here, I hired account executives, but they did SDR work too. They helped with customers. They helped with onboarding. They helped with customer success. I mean, the bigger you get, maybe you go into your own swim lane, but you definitely need someone who's adaptable. So I'll start asking them questions of how they were able to do that in their past, which gets to the relatability. It gets to the, the 1 or the 2 beer question that I want with them, and their experiences, which kind of leads into empathy. Like, have they gone through something similar to this? And they will be empathetic to our situation. Again, within more startup or mid-market companies, we don't have unlimited resources. We're not going to be able to have the biggest tech stack to be able to help you from an automation perspective. And so therefore, can you do more or an adequate amount with less? And understanding, and that's where sometimes going from big company to small companies don't always translate. And then the last thing I look for is patience. And maybe this goes to the no asshole thing, Brian, but like, I want people who have only a little bit of patience. Like, have the good patience for your coworkers, for things that we're going through, but I want you to have no patience for the sales process, which that's what leads into urgency. And so again, I asked during the process, like, tell me about how long is your current sales cycle? And then tell me what your longest sales cycle was, and how did that sit with you? What did you do? And anybody who's like okay with it is where I start to poke a little bit to find out a little bit more of. So again, for me, it's just asking a lot of stories, asking for stories, and asking like the questions behind the question.
Good. I'll be brief. There's 2 things that come to mind. There's no silver bullet here. I think you can tell from Julia's answer, Mike's answer, and even from mine. Like, there's so many things that go into this based on where your company is, what you're trying to accomplish, length of the sales cycle. For me, and I'll tell you, I haven't hired 50 or 100 salespeople, but the teams that I have hired and the companies I've been a part of that have hired great salespeople, they go hand in hand, right? Intellectual curiosity and then perceptiveness. What I mean by perceptiveness is just the ability to figure things out. We are in I don't say world, but we are in a business where the buyer has so much information. You almost have to peel back the layers to get to, like, what are you really trying to figure out? What is it that you're really here for? Is this really your pain? Is this the true pain you have, or the true gap you have? And so a person, and I don't even know if you can teach this, but it's just an instinctual thing of perceptiveness to be able to figure out that situation. And I could tie that all the way back to prospecting. I could tie it to the ability to do a great discovery, closing, but somebody who has the ability to figure it out, I think that's like the number one trait. And it kind of goes hand in hand with intellectual curiosity, right? When somebody gives you an answer, or you're interviewing and they give you a rebuttal or response, when you ask them another question, do they have the ability to sit and say, well, hey, this that makes sense, or hey, that question you asked doesn't apply to me? Them have that ability to vocalize that. I think that is something like the number one trait I've seen from the best hires I've ever made. Right? They just have the ability to figure. In the interview, I say like, how do I know when the shit hits the fan? You can't get a hold of me. You can't get a hold of a coworker because most of us are remote. How do I know you're gonna have the ability to figure it out? Right? And it's the same thing what Mike was saying earlier. Julie was hitting at is tell me a story. So I'm asking that without telling you, tell me a story. Right. And based on that, I pretty much know. And this is my style. I pretty much know after that question if I'm gonna hire you. And I tooting my own horn here a little bit. Everybody that's answered that question on point where I just was like, okay, let's cut the crap. How much do you want? When can you be on board? Right. I pretty much after that question, I know. And everybody's worked out who's answered that question greatly. So great question.
Great. So we're moving right along and kind of getting in, and we're kind of intermingling some of the responses here, but moving into the process of hiring candidates. Julie and I, ironically, we're just working on a project together, and she gave me a pretty almost sickening statistic when I read it, and it was it takes and this is quote, it takes approximately 23 times for a candidate to see your job posting before even applying for one job. To me, I literally had to read that 3 times because I was like, is that serious? No wonder no one's applying for jobs. But that being said, Julia, from a recruiting and hiring process, like what does that mean to you from just a process perspective? And what are your thoughts on on being able to improve that statistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if you remove just the idea that the market has been in a very odd place for the past couple of years, and it's thrown at all of us a ton of curveballs, I think ultimately, at least here, we don't rely on inbound, and we at least can't fully rely on inbound when it comes to hiring and recruiting. We're not the Googles of the world, and like many companies, we don't have a big brand that brings in larger volumes of candidates to us. And so we've really done 3 main things to ensure that we've been proactive in hiring salespeople. I think one of them, we really we started to pump up our just employer branding in general. Early on when we were just building a sales org and there really was no one here, we brought Mike on and it was, how do we build this from zero? There wasn't that much to show. But as we grew a little bit, showing what life is actually like at the company, our team, marketing our culture. We happen to have incredible culture here. Not all orgs can boast about that, and which is the first thing you should fix, by the way. But the moment that we really began putting our culture on display, sharing things directly, from our employees about how the team feels working here, work-life balance, a lot of things that we hadn't really put out publicly, our inbound honestly went up a ton. There was a lot of outreach we got, seeing a post about this or hearing about, an annual trip we did here, or someone that had posted on LinkedIn about the work-life balance and how they get to structure their day. Like that started to make actually a pretty big impact on people really applying to Rocket Reach. The other 2, I mean, targeted sourcing, like you have to do outbound and you have to have recruiters that are able to and willing to really do strong outbound and pull people from the right places that are going to be really relevant for you. And then I also think leaning on your current team. If you have amazing people that are there on your team, it's just a gold mine of network and people that they can reach out to. Make sure you have a really strong referral program and give people good referral bonuses. We when we introduced that at the beginning, it's been incredibly successful. We get a lot of, I think probably half our team right now is a result of people either direct or indirect referrals. And that's been an incredibly kind of productive way to bring in people that we knew would be a good culture fit, but also that really actually surprisingly brought in a lot of diversity. We have a really awesome kind of mix of backgrounds that the sales team comes from too.
So essentially, Julia, we have a question here. Are we building a salesperson pipeline?
For sure.
Or a people pipeline, I should say, for hiring.
For sure. I think every role, regardless of where that sits in the org, you're building a huge pipeline of people. And you need to always, I think we always know you want to have at least 3 people that you're comparing at the end of, at the end of the pipeline. In those final stages that you get to make a decision. And that takes a lot of other people, to be in the beginning stages and middle stages to get people to bottom of the funnel. But absolutely, in a lot of ways, in terms of the way that we on the back end talk about recruiting, it is very similar to the way salespeople talk about sales. You absolutely have a pipeline you're driving for that role.
Great. And then just to kind of still talk about, the process of recruiting new individuals and some questions that we have as far as, what we're looking for from a candidate. So how much, we had a question in Q&A and the question was, how much and how do you have the candidate support, i.e. proof to what they're saying? So proof is in the pudding, right? What do they have to show you? Do they have to show you earnings? Do they have to show you, largest sale they've had, prospecting success rate? What kind of proof are you looking for? And I think, we can maybe have Mike and Brian touch base on this. Like, what proof are you looking for from a candidate in any role, from junior to executive?
I've never said send me a W-2. I've never had anyone who get me proof of, since most of it's probably illegal anyway if they try to take something out of their Salesforce. But I will ascertain it again. I get it through stories. So look, if they're an amazing storyteller and they faked it pretty well and I buy it wholeheartedly, then so be it. But I do, have them tell me about stories of companies they've won business from, companies they've lost business from, outreach they've had, but also what the support system might be. In other words, like, nobody wins it alone. So tell me, who was the person, just use first names, that helped you out with doing this, that, and the other. And I just get to ideally a level of specificity that doesn't feel like that they could fake it completely. And if they can, more power to them. But for physical things, I've never had anybody send me anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of that, even I know you can't ask for a W-2 to approve it. But asking, for them to tell you how they did something or, how much they've obtained in a year from a sales position, I'm sure is very important when looking, or at least how they're able to answer said questions. Brian, any feedback from you on that?
Mike, I'm glad you went first. And my mind went racing. One, that question, I think I would say you probably need to shift your mindset and how you're going about recruiting. If you've got to lead with that, or if you feel like you need to ask those questions, you probably need to change your entire recruiting process. And I'm making assumptions off of very little. I think the biggest thing, and I'm kind of going a little bit of a rant here because I love what Julia was saying before about the process. It's interesting. We do so much for customers. We build out an entire customer journey. We spend thousands of dollars in marketing to make sure our customers are happy. We even see it now, right? So a lot of companies spending thousands of dollars just on prospects who may never sign and hopes to sign. So why haven't we switched that mindset to the candidate side of what we do, right? Why do we not? I haven't been a part of a company that has, well, at least until now, with Vendition, where we look at what does our candidate journey look like? What does it look like from the moment they interact with us to the minute they get a job, right? Why do we not build a funnel out for that? Why do we not spend lots of money on the candidate? If you want to get the best candidate, if you want to get somebody, if we're talking about executive level people, you have to do the due diligence. Because I can tell you right now, from what I know so far about Mike, what I know about Julia, you have to do your due diligence if you ever want to hire them, right? So I would probably say you probably need to shift your mindset about how you're going through the process. One of the coolest ways I've seen companies help with this maddening of how many times somebody needs to see your job posting and how many times you need to be involved with the candidate is supplying a interview process that's best fit for the candidate. And so there's a real cool company we work for. We partner with Vendition that does a two-style interview process. So the candidate has the ability to select either a panel that they interview with, a panel style interview, or a one-on-one, your traditional style interview process. And so to me, that's something so small. It's not risky. And it's so great because it puts the person in their best place to be able to communicate what they need to communicate to figure out if I'm the right person fit for this job, as well as you're trying to see if they're the right fit. So hope this helpful. I was trying not to go on a rant, but stuff.
Yeah, I actually, Brian, I definitely the just similar to what you were saying. Most of the time, if you're doing the right thing in the recruiting process, you're back channeling the person or you're going to do references. And although, depending on the references, a lot of people feel, many ways, there's many schools of thought about references that you receive. But for the most part, I don't know if there's anyone that I have not back channeled. Outside of just sales, every single person we've hired here the last 2 years, for the most part, you usually back channel. You're going to have a good idea of whether someone's a relative thumbs up or not on that person you're bringing onto the team. You should really try to, at least. I think digging into the details or putting the pressure on about quota attainment in an interview is awkward and you're getting at the wrong things. There are ways to assess baseline, success of that person in the past without doing that.
Good segue, because now we have a we have a question about emotional intelligence and what that plays in the interview process. And I think Julie, your comment about looking at other ways to evaluate candidates. What does from the three of you, what does emotional intelligence and play in part in somebody's interview process?
I see your mouth open, Mike.
Yeah, well, that was me thinking 5 seconds before. I think EQ is a big part of it. And honestly, I think it's what gets people away from like scripted answers as opposed to like recognizing what the question was asked, or again, what's the question behind the question and kind of calling it out. But it just, being able to have high EQ just shows me as well as the ability to work well with others and creates that, environment that we really need as we start to grow, especially when we only have a few people and each person all of a sudden is 20% of the sales organization. So again, I know I'm repeating myself, but for me, it's asking a lot of open-ended questions and a lot of like, tell me about the experiences that you've had. And again, I don't go to all positive, like tell me about the best experience with someone. I sometimes go to the negative, like tell me about the last conflict that you had. Tell me about the last thing that you disagreed with your manager over and what was it and how did you handle it? And especially when I have leadership types of interviews, it goes way, way deeper than that even. Like, do you have all of the questions and none of the answers types of things? So I lean into EQ a lot, and it's usually not a direct type of question, but it's a ton of indirect and just figuring out why did they do what they did? How did they do what they did? And the best ones that I get are people to recognize what type of question I'm asking and then call it out and then go and proceed to answer it.
I think, so the question, what role does emotional intelligence play on an interview as well as on the job? The number one thing I would say is you probably can't have somebody who lacks EQ interview someone for EQ. Number one step. I know it sounds real simple, but it's just so true. The second thing, I think this makes or breaks a salesperson. I really do. And it goes back into like, I just don't know if it can be taught. I think it comes from experience. I think it comes from trials. I think it comes from failure. It comes from wins. I don't know if it can be taught. So I think it plays a great part in it. And it kind of goes back into what I said about the trait you're looking for, right? You're looking for somebody that has a great sense of perceptiveness, somebody who has the ability to figure it out, right? One way I would probably, in my opinion, test for this, does the person wait to ask questions at the very end, or are they stopping me in the middle of the conversation to ask a clarifying question in the interview? There's no way two humans, I shouldn't say there's no way, that's absolute. very rare that two humans sit together and completely understand each other, right? Throughout the entire time. So somebody's just, nope, no questions, and I just keep going as I'm interviewing. More than likely, that person lacks some form of EQ. That's just my opinion. You're not going to find that in a book, in the science somewhere, but that's just my personal opinion. So,
I completely agree. I have to second, first of all, the first thing you said, Brian, which is um, whoever is conducting your behavioral interview, your interview that is focused on communication and culture fit and EQ, needs to have strong EQ. And there's just no way to assess it otherwise. And I think it's really someone that is able to interview, ask questions, listen. It's a great example of, like, having a true candid back and forth, someone that stops you, asks clarifying questions, isn't afraid to actually have a true healthy back and forth. I think, to get really meta about it, like most interviews in general, not even just for salespeople, if you can have a really productive back and forth, if someone has looked you up before the call and can call out things that, and not in the salesy way where you want them to look at where you went to school and, call out something about, the town in which your school was. Like, it doesn't need to be so specific as that. But if someone can have a pretty transparent, really healthy back and forth with you in a conversation, usually they're able to pick up cues throughout that conversation that show the entire time they're active listening, and they're playing back things that you've brought up. I love, even though everyone feels differently about it, I love that if I've shared a few key details about the team or the business, that whatever that person brings up as they start talking, they clearly pull out a handful of things I just said and relate and bring back either their experience, their current company, their environment directly to what I've shared, and can draw parallels to all of that. I think it really shows not only they're listening, but they have the ability to take that and relate it to the experience they're having, or something that an environment they know well. But I think whoever's running this interview has to be really one of the people that you can put in front of anyone, and they're going to be able to communicate and collaborate with that person.
And I would say listening skills would be a very highly rated trait for a salesperson, in my opinion. Being able to listen and not just force their, quote unquote opinion or their sales, product down somebody's throat, but to really listen to what the person needs and wants, and be able to provide a solution-based solution for that person. So
I saw a question too. I don't know if you want me to
Yep.
answer, but I did see a question in the Q&A.
Yep.
Just like what's shifting from having no salespeople to now having 30, and what do you look for? And I think Mike would probably agree with some of this. Mike, you probably maybe have a different answer, but I think at the beginning, when you're first just building the foundation of the team, you're looking for people that truly can build and are really just truly operators. They're going to come in and be able to be really adaptable, roll with the punches, can really get into the dirty work of, there's usually a handful of things they're going to be doing in that beginning that maybe a year from now they're not going to be doing anymore, because there's more carved out teams. So they need to be really willing to just dig in and really be an operator. And I think as we've grown, you look at what the team looks like now, whether we're looking at the strategic, enterprise sales team, or if we're looking at the mid-market sales team, you look at who's in that team now and where the skill sets sit. And we now get to be way more selective about how strategic is this next person we need that's coming into, strategic enterprise team. Like, we want them to be able to operate, but we have a group now of really good operators. Where can we now fill in the gaps and bring in people that can actually really think strategically and bring in some strategic problem solving to how we're approaching customers and how we're approaching prospects? Like, there's just a level of puzzle piecing that we now get to do of, where are the gaps in terms of skill set? How do we even that out and bring people in that can really marry the skill sets that already exist on the team well?
Yeah, and in the beginning, it's those that have the enjoyment of doing a little bit of everything. And then as we get more mature, we know they're probably going to stay within the lanes of what it is, what it is that they're doing, but we need to be doing that better. So like, look, we've been growing 100% year over year. In the beginning, that included like the amount of headcount, obviously. Like in a year and a half, we went from 1 to 30. So like you grow incredibly fast, and there's so many learnings and opportunities for people. But eventually you get to a point where we're still growing from a revenue perspective over 100% year over year, but we don't have to grow the number of people 100%. And so the individuals that are there, some of them who have been here for quite a while, know the record number of like internal promotions that we had before. Well, it's now how do they adapt to what the new environment looks like? So as we bring on our next people that we're bringing on, we've already learned from some of that. And Julie, you called it out as well, but also learning from the people who have come in earlier, we know who is good. Like what type of sales cycle should they come from? What type of environment can they come from, to think a little bit outside the box? Because we don't always hire people from the direct competitors. So therefore, what's the best environment that they should be from in order to be successful in where we are now, not where we were when we first started?
I think there's also a little bit of internal work that has to happen here, where you do have to have your sales managers and your sales leadership doing a really good job of understanding each person on their team, really actually having a good pulse on what those skill sets are with their team, where they're strongest, and where those gaps are that do need to be filled, so that you can find the right people to fill those. And that takes a little bit of that, focused on more development and learning from the sales team and sales leadership.
And as far as hiring, I know, Brian, thank you for responding in the chat. But real quick, before we're about 10 minutes left, and I have one more question that I think is really important for each of you to answer. But before we go there, really quick, when hiring people, in regards to understanding their personal, what this gentleman said, or this person said, the person within the salesperson, or any tools that can help augment some of those attributes that you're looking for that you use. I know Brian gave an example, but anything, Julia, Mike, that you've used in the past as far as tools to help understand the strengths of the individuals.
Can I just elaborate real quick on teaming?
Mm-hmm.
Just in case anybody watching it doesn't have access to the chat. So it's a really cool function. I love finding tools. By the way, they don't pay us. We're not a partner or anything like that. So I'm not like assigning them because they. Anyway, it's a really cool dynamic though, where anybody you're interacting with at your company, when you have meetings, there's always this thing in the background. They're adding on to it. I just saw they announced they're releasing a function that tells you, like, here's the things that you may end up doing more in this type of environment. Here are some things that you'll do well, you may do poorly. But it literally, my boss and I, we have a teaming meeting, and it will tell us like things like, hey, here's Hannah's strength. My boss name is Hannah. And then here's Brian's strengths. Here's some things you two, because of these things, you may struggle with. And it's always there to remind us. At the end of meetings, we can look and say, hey, did we figure this one thing we never figure out because your strength is here, my strength is here? It's a really cool, really fun tool. I love it. I'm a very introspective person. I think based on the question, that's what you're looking for, is how do you find out that information without asking? And teaming does a phenomenal job at doing that. So check them out. I've dropped the link in the comments. It's teaming.com also.
Perfect. Anything from you, Mike or Julia?
I've used like personality assessments that Jonathan doesn't want to hear about.
We were
in the
told
chats.
I was like, we were told not to say that. Sorry, Jonathan.
I don't use them here. I've only used them in one place before, and it's like it aids in the conversation a little bit. And then there's always the time it's like, I love that person, but the score gave them a 3. So anyway, I'll stop talking. No, I don't have anything collective to add on that topic.
I honestly don't. I do not use any sort of tool or automation in terms of true assessment of people and of salespeople. We don't use anything here. That may change over time, but for right now, yeah, we use ourselves.
I guess it takes the people out of the hiring process in some instances. But Well, so in closing, I have a very important, a very, very important question. So, first off, I mean, we greatly appreciate everybody staying on. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your day, and everyone learning about how to hire and recruit, top-notch sales talent. So we opened the discussion today with kind of a personal tip from each of you, and so we're going to end it with one. So you all have very, very impressive resumes, all being in your unique field, particularly in sales and hiring for sales for a long time. And I was going to list out every year that you've been in for each of you and combine it, but I figured we didn't want to do that. So one thing you could give, just to kind of close it out, what is the number one piece of advice in being successful in a sales role?
It's one of those, how do you come up with one thing? but I would say, like, besides everything that we've said, and to not repeat, like, I think a very common question, I don't know when it started, but is people asking of, hey, if I'm successful in this role, what's the next role? And it doesn't bother me. I've heard from some people like, well, don't ask about the next role until you're successful in the one that you're currently in. But I think a lot of individuals, especially junior level individuals, are looking for places where they can have advancement, knowing it's tough to go to be an SDR to a closer if you can't do it in your current environment, or a closer to a manager if you can't do it in your current environment. But the advice that I'd actually give to people is do the job that you have now, do it really well, but start to learn for what the next one is. Don't start doing whatever the next one necessarily is, but start learning about it. The people that I run into that usually also fit the asshole bill are the ones that stop wanting to learn, that think that they happen to know it all, and they stop educating themselves. And it doesn't have to be go read this book or go join this organization, but it's having conversations and trying to learn from everyone else of, well, what did you do differently that helped you win that one deal? Because if I take that one thing away and increase my percentages, it is only going to help me move into whatever the next role happens to be. As soon as I see people that stop asking on how to help themselves win and just keep wanting to speak about it, is the moment I know that their ears aren't open for constructive feedback as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the beginning of the end. But some people think that salespeople have to know all the answers, and it's not. My biggest instruction to sales management is have all of the questions and none of the answers. Just ask a ton of questions of who it is that reports to you and let them figure it out for themselves.
I have it's not totally different than the direction you're going, Mike, but I think that if you always have one person that you admire and look to, you admire the way that they conduct themselves, and you admire the successes they're having in their role, and you look to a few things that you really want to be able to adopt and learn from that person, and it kind of be obsessive about how you can get there and what you can learn from them. I think having those types of examples, it allows you to see what's motivating to you, the areas and skills that you need to develop or improve on that you're not there, you just don't have yet. I think it humbles you to the things that may be on the weaker side, and helps you figure out how to solve problems to address those. But I really do think that learning from a example and learning from someone that feels like an idol and a really a next step for yourself is a huge driver of motivation.
Yeah, I'll quickly add, probably from personal experience, honestly, it's kind of the pain I deal with now, not now, but I've experienced. And being a sales professional, I learned very early on a sale is the right time, right message, right medium. In my opinion, we control two of those. Time is not one of them, right? Our buyers realistically decide that. So for me, who you work for matters. So do the due diligence of who you're going to work for, the company in itself, the boss, and then their boss right after that. Because if you get a promotion, that's who you're going to be working for next. I've done a poor job in the beginning, early on in my career, at doing that, and so I've learned that but I've learned it through watching people like Scott Barker. I've learned it through watching people like Beck Holland, Morgan Ingram's another person. So like those people very early on paid well attention to who they were learning from, because again, medium and message, you can learn that from somebody who you're working for. Better different ways to outreach, better different forms of communication. Time is something I think we can't really control. So paying attention to who you're going to work for, I think, in my opinion, is the number one advice I could give to any person that plans to be successful in sales.
I couldn't agree more. That was the other answer I was toying with. Is yeah, your boss. They're your number one advocate. So I totally agree, Brian.
Well, great. I appreciate everyone again in our conversation today. I think it went really well. We had some really great feedback from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Savannah now.
Yep. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Mike and Brian and Julia for sharing your wonderful tips today and insight with the community. Thank you all for showing up and being here and being present as an attendee. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thursday, we've got an event on how to build predictable pipeline to study your course to revenue and actually hit your number. Next Tuesday, we've got the science of selling, how to hit a new level of sales efficiency. That's it from me. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you Thursday.